1 week season, fam. Sharp Football Analysis Nation. We are back. Week 4. Week 3 is in the books, and what a week it was. We saw some historic level production from an NFL perspective. We saw some historic level production from a fantasy perspective. Moving forward, now we have what some are calling the game of the year up to this point. And in 2021, at 1 week season, we had this rule, and we called it a hard and fast rule. It was always one Viking. So I posed the question, are we approaching that territory with this 2023 version of the Miami Dolphins? Do we need to institute a rule of always one Dolphin? More on that in today's episode of Searching for Ceiling, presented by 1 week season and Sharp Football Analysis.
1 week season.
As always, you know the drill. I am joined by Rich Hribar, not Hribar. Rich, how we doing this weekend, man?
Well, we're doing good. I mean, it's crazy. We're, by the time we get to Sunday, it will be October, which is pretty wild to think about. The first month is already in the books. It feels like it goes so fast, right? Like the process throughout the week. We put all this work in for 6 days to get to Sunday. We hope it works out. Sometimes you play too much Josh Kelly, and it definitely doesn't. But, we're going to try to come back in week 4 and try to make the magic happen.
Rich, too soon, man. Too soon. Happy Friday to you as well, Chris. And we appreciate those words, Bart. We are here, man. We are here every week. If you're missing out on this, tell your friends, tell grandma. Come hang out with Searching for Ceiling, presented by 1 week season and Sharp Football Analysis. You'll see Rich and I every single week. So that introduction, Rich, is going to set us up for where we're going to start this week. And it's with the kind of alluded to it in multiple different ways with this Miami Dolphins and Buffalo Bills game. We're going to spend a little bit of time similar to how we did last week with the quote unquote game of the week. And obviously, the underlying tone here is we're searching for potential hidden ceiling. So with that, I'll just throw it directly over to you. What are you seeing from this game? And are there any spots where we might find some sneaky ceiling here?
Yeah, this game in general is tricky for a couple levels. One, there absolutely is like an avenue where this game is like fantastic, right? Like we get this huge run out. We get the 2 highest scoring teams in the NFL on a per drive basis. But there is like capable components for like this game to like still be in like the mid 20s and like kind of like not fully pop. Also, we have like a lot of salary like implications here. There's 2 sides of this. One, if we just look at the Dolphins side, ever since that Dolphins-Ravens game last year, I think it was in week 2 or week 3, they have made it extremely hard for you to build 2 double stacks. Like even with like Jalen Waddle's price never has like dropped to the levels of like where he actually probably should be priced because of that inherent reason. Like they've seen what the ceiling offers when this like offense just absolutely bakes. So if you want to play 2 double stacks, they are 48% of your salary on DraftKings, 42% on FanDuel. And inherently, if you say, well, all right, well, I'll just pull Waddle out, the guy you are going to want to run that back with is Stephon Diggs, and he's more expensive than Waddle on both sites. So that increases that salary even more. So it's very hard from that aspect to kind of like go crazy with this game. So you have to look at kind of the ancillary components. And you can say, when looking at the Miami Dolphins side, there's a path to where the Dolphins can score points where it's not the passing game. We've already seen it, right? In 2 weeks. In week 2, they had 24 points scored. It was a Raheem Mostert game. Mike McDaniel, used that, that outside run scheme while the Patriots dropped back, played a lot of zone coverage. They put a lot of emphasis on Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle in that game. So what did the Bills come out and do and approach this, defensively? Last year, the Bills were aggressive with Tua. They only blitzed 18.8% of the time against everyone in the NFL, but they blitzed Tua 32% of the time in the 2 games. It didn't work. I mean, Tua absolutely cooked them. He had the second highest pass rating that any quarterback had against the Bills last year in his 2, meetings. So what did they do? Because when they didn't blitz Tua last year, he averaged 9.5 yards per pass attempt. So it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation with this offense. But we have seen avenues where the Dolphins running backs can score a lot of points, and not just last week. So the Bills side is a little bit different. You don't have to just eat up the whole shot clock here. But the Bills side's a little bit different because you figure if the Bills are going to get this game there and the Bills are going to score 30 points or push, upper 20s, it's going to go through Josh Allen, right? Like it always does. So you can get a little bit more, I think, creative with like the Bills ancillary pass catchers than you can the Miami ones. Also, when you look at the target stack, with the Dolphins, like we're just not seeing the Berrioses, the Julian Hills now, who people are excited about, and River Craycrafts of the world, like get actual tangible target value.
Yeah, and there's also some interesting aspects with this game because you mentioned River Craycraft, Eric Ezukanma. Let's get that right. Come on, Hilow. Those guys have been on the injury report. They've missed practice each of the first 2 days of the week. But when you look at how kind of Miami handles their offensive design, and it goes back to last year with Mike McDaniel, right? It's like, why are you not using tight ends, or why are you not using the secondary ancillary pieces of the offense? And it's like, we got Tyreek Hill, dude. We got Jalen Waddle, dude. We got Raheem Mostert, dude. Why would we use those guys? So
Right.
that kind of discussion is like, this is a concentrated, hyper-focused offense. And you mentioned the running game. This is very interesting to me because we have a Bills defense who primarily has been playing out of nickel this season. They've used a lot of cover 2. They've used a lot of cover 3. And when you talk about, like, if I'm sitting there in Mike McDaniel's shoes and this opposing defense is showing me a lot of nickel packages and they're trying to hammer down, basically play a more prevent style and keep the game in front of me, it's like, yeah, I'm going to use this outside zone run scheme and just run all over them. The other piece of that, and this goes into Mike McDaniel's genius or madness or however you want to call it. This dude is playing chess, man, with the league. This year in their run game, in addition to this spread style zone gap outside rushing scheme, he's instituting some like fancy inside zone guard pulling gap run scheme. I don't even know what to call it because the league hasn't seen it really until this year. And it has been effective because he is running a lot off tackle. He is using a lot of pulling tackles and guards, that standard zone gap run blocking scheme. But now he's doing some of those principles between the guards or off center or off guard. And it's like this inside zone run block gap. Like, we don't even know what to call it, but it's incredible what he's doing with this offense. And now, and we saw it in week 2 that sprung Raheem Mostert for his 42-yarder touchdown. We saw it in week 3 that sprung Raheem Mostert for one of his touchdowns, that sprung Devon A. Chan, get that right, for one of his touchdowns. So this matchup is very interesting to me for the sense of trying to put ourselves in the coach's shoes and a part of this chess match that's going to be going on. And it's very interesting. And I honestly don't know what to make of it, but I know that Mike McDaniel is a madman. He's a genius, and he is doing some stuff that the league quite simply has not seen. And that is after doing stuff that the league had not seen last year. So what do you make of this rushing attack? Are you as excited about it as I seem to be?
Yeah, how could you not be, especially the past 2 weeks, right? He's just cooking it all up. And you're getting a lot of that stuff too. They're showing you're getting some of that inside running game, like with some of that pullers, but like they're still doing all the back end bells and whistles. Like you're still getting the jet motion, you're getting the orbit looks where you're counting for Tyreek Hill coming in motion, right? Like this isn't just like Braxton Berrios coming for like an orbit look, right? Like it's Tyreek Hill. So the defense is going to be drawn to that, and it's pulling all of the eyes and attention, or just giving you to freeze for a second, right? Like you hold the defense still for a second with guys like Mostert and Achan now, or whatever he wants. When you score 50 PPR points in your second career game, you can tell us whatever you want to be called. That's cool. He could go by whatever.
We will bow down. We will make it happen.
But when you have that much speed and you're able to just get the defense to not play downhill for a second, like it's over. We've seen it now 2 weeks in a row, and even going back to last year. And the Bills are such a boomer bust run defense. We talked about it a little bit a couple weeks ago with, like Josh Jacobs coming into that game, and they're doing the same thing they did last year. They're really good on like rate of runs where they're getting high stuff rates. They're hitting opponents in the backfield, But then when you get to the outside in the second level against them, you make their defensive backs have to tackle. And that's been a huge problem for them the past 2 years. They give up a lot of huge runs in the run game. We saw it again last week with Brian Robinson. Brian Robinson had another like huge gain against them, but it did, eventually he got scripted out of the game, but it didn't matter. He only had 10 carries. But we've seen it again to start this year. They're 31st in the NFL in rate of running back runs that go for 10 or more yards, but they are also third in the NFL in stuff rate. So this is the kind of game where, like, yeah, even if Mike McDaniels has a couple unsuccessful runs, like he's probably going to pop a few here.
And that, from a schematic sense and how Sean McDermott is running that defense, those metrics make perfect sense.
Yes.
If you combine the on tape, and yeah, we watch tape here. If you combine like on tape and you combine the underlying metrics, we're left with a lot of that makes sense because Sean McDermott is utilizing heavy rates of nickel package. He's utilizing heavy rates of cover 2 and cover 3, but his linebacking core are extremely shallow. They are playing very, very close to the line of scrimmage. And what that means is it requires a certain type of linebacker to be athletic enough and smart enough from a positioning mindset to cover down on those B gaps based on his 3-4 hybrid 4-3 defensive front. But it also requires them to drop in coverage. And that is why I'm so interested in this Miami Dolphins backfield this week, is because now when you're attacking that, where you have 7 or 8 sometimes defenders within the first 2 yards of the line of scrimmage, when you're talking about zone gap rushing off of tackle against that could generate some of these splash plays that we're talking about. And then once they get those linebackers to drop back a little bit, that's when Mike McDaniel is throwing these inside zones concepts at you, and it's insane. So yeah, again, Mike McDaniel is a genius, a madman, whatever the case may be, however you want to classify him. But what he is doing is very difficult to defend. And it is going to be very difficult for Sean McDermott to defend. In that same discussion, we have to look at Vic Fangio on the other side and his defensive scheme. He's basically the coach that put the league on this current trajectory of too high shells. He's the guy that like put this all into motion. And when you have that coming up against this Bills defense, that significantly dents the splash play expectation, we'll call it, or potential for a guy like Gabe Davis, where he is now their backs are going to be backing off. They're going to have their eyes on the quarterback. They're going to be looking and managing and not letting anything over top with their eyes in the backfield. So with that kind of sets up for a bump to the volume expectation for a guy like Stephon Diggs. It is very interesting for a guy like James Cook, who is right around the 60 to 65% snap rate that we want to see for a lead back. We know that he is extremely involved in the pass game. So when we talk about hidden ceiling or searching for ceiling, while the field is going to be interested in this game, we're probably not going to see a lot of people want to play both backs or multiple backs from this game, or some of these, like Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid, who also set up well to take advantage of a too high scheme. So there's a lot of interesting layers to this game. And when you have two defensive minds that are looking to play this more prevent style of defensive scheme, it's going to lead to these teams being more forced to march the field, string together drives, put together 8 to 12 play drives in order to get into the red zone. So the volume should be there, but we have a lowered expectation, I think, than the field is probably going to think in this spot of these splash plays developing. I think for everybody but the Miami run game, which is just stupid right now. It's so good. What are your thoughts on, like, does this game have more paths to failure, I think, than the field is probably thinking here?
I think when you use the term failure, maybe in context of, maybe trying to chase what happened in like Chargers Vikings, a week ago, something like that. I do think this game do think both teams definitely get into the 20s. But do we have like a 60-point game? Do we have a 70-point game, right? Like maybe some people are thinking of, even old Chiefs Rams style from a couple years ago. Maybe the Dolphins are just that damn good. We'll see. I mean, we did see, like I said, we have 2 weeks ago sample where the Patriots at least like made them work.
Yeah.
So that like is still something to think about. Even the team coming off of 70 points. I do think though that like it could be a situation where like Stephon Diggs has like you don't want to say he has the game Keenan Allen had last week, but because of how much quarters cover 6 like Vic Fangio wants to run, we've already seen Stephon Diggs this year. He's been targeted on 30% of his routes against zone schemes versus 20.6% against man coverage. It could be a game where he does get he could approach 15 targets, right? Like in that type of zone. The James Cook is probably the ultimate wild card in this game. And it's because he's not typically in like a leverage spot. We talked about the Dolphins run game. So you can build bill stacks, say Allen, Diggs, maybe an ancillary piece, and run it back with one of the Dolphins running backs, or hell, maybe even 2. The explosive game, you try to get that run out, and you're getting leverage on what you didn't bet that you're betting against, right? You didn't play Tua, you didn't play Tyreek Hill, you didn't play Jalen Waddle, so you're getting leverage. James Cook doesn't necessarily provide that same leverage on the inverse faction because he doesn't have a role at the goal line. So if he is to score a touchdown, it probably still goes through Josh Allen, like as a bet. So he doesn't provide that like inherent leverage that you would typically get playing the running back versus the opposing passing game, right? Like playing the inverse side, the Tyreek or Waddle with Tua side. So he's an ultimate wild card in this game. So maybe he's just a stacking partner with Josh Allen as opposed to trying to create leverage with.
100%. I love that thought process, that theoretical breaking down, like, what does playing this player mean? And what does it mean that I'm betting against? That if-then statement that we use so frequently at 1 week season, which is basically, if this happens, then that means this. And that is a way to kind of visualize and conceptualize this idea of how do we build leverage smartly in a lineup. My main, I think, focus, and if for my MME folks listening, is probably to utilize James Cook as a pairing partner with one of the Miami backs, which is likely to be done at the lowest frequency from this game. And that can be like, how does that play out? That can be James Cook sees 7 targets, which is very much within his realm, range of outcomes here, catches 5 balls for 40 yards, and that removes the need for one of those touchdowns. But we're still betting on James Cook eclipsing 100 yards. And I think this game sets up well for him to have a shot at that. He's done it once. He's come very close the other time. And from a conceptual perspective of who James Cook is this year, he's 3rd in the league in rushing right now. So this guy, the problem is that's all coming between the 20s and Latavius Murray. And, they gave
him one shot last week to punch one in, and then they took him right off the field.
Yeah. So Latavius Murray is seeing those inside the 5 runs. Damian Harris is mixing in the red zone. Each of those guys have a rushing touchdown this year, and James Cook does not. So, yeah, I don't know what to make of that, but
he
James
is
Cook
second in the NFL in explosive run yardage created. So like if he were to have a rushing touchdown, the probability that it would not come at the goal line, at least it's in his range of outcomes to have like a 15-yard touchdown run, or even further. But yeah, if they get inside the 5, then
don't get tackled inside the 5, dude. Which is,
it's like the Varsity Blues running back from the movie Varsity Blues. He's got to score we got Lance Arbor here and Josh Allen soaking up these touchdowns.
Yeah, seriously, it's maddening, their usage. But for the second week in a row, we spent the first 20 minutes of the show discussing the top game environment of the week. So I'm going to throw it over to you directly, and let's talk about some of these. I don't even want to call them secondary, but these secondary game environments that could pop off for some hidden ceiling for us this week.
Yeah, I don't know where we want to start. If we want to start ugly, we want to start back. I mean, we could say, just look at the late swap situation and say, look at Raiders Chargers. Obviously, we're recording this at noon on a Friday, and we have not got official word on Jimmy Garoppolo's availability. Obviously, we would love for him to be available in this game because, we have a situation. It's like with the Vikings last week. I mean, we have two defenses that are just giving up the bag every week. I mean, we saw the Raiders wake up a dormant Kenny Pickett on Sunday Night Football last week. The Chargers once again, were absolutely eviscerated through the air. So they're giving up these huge plays. And we've got this Raiders team that just has this hyper condensed usage tree.
Beautiful.
We've seen it with Jacoby Myers back. I mean, in the 2 games Jacoby Myers and Devontae Adams have played, they have 70% of the team targets. Like, we know where it's going, and we know we want to target the pass game. And we've got this game at 4:00, right? Versus this game at 1:00. That's going to have a lot of the ownership pulled to it, especially if we don't have Jimmy Garoppolo. But we've seen Devontae Adams even last year have a 30-point game with Jarrett Stidham against the 49ers of all teams. So, is he a guy that's going to go overlooked? We have direct leverage spots because Keenan Allen's going to be popular. We're going to see Josh Palmer draw ownership, especially if Austin Eckler is out. So, I mean, this game has a lot of, I think, more pieces in it, especially when you factor in salary, that could impact the slate actually more than the Miami Buffalo game.
Yes, you brought up one of our key phrases here at 1 week season, and that's the potential for late swap. This slate is very interesting for the potential for late swap. We have Deebo Samuel, who is questionable, has yet to practice this week. Brandon Ayuk has been on the injury report. We know that the 49ers have scored 30 or more points in now 8 of 10 Brock Purdy starts, so we can expect them to put up some points. And we know Kyle Shanahan is very similar to that discussion we had about Mike McDaniel, where it's a concentrated offense that becomes more concentrated when one of the primary pieces are out. So there's a lot going on with the potential for some late swappability for the 49ers. You mentioned the hyper concentration of Las Vegas, and now we also have Mike Williams out for the Chargers, and we have Austin Eckler, who returned to practice for the first time since his ankle injury, but we know the team is on bye next week. So there is a ton of moving pieces with the late 3 games in this slate that could basically I don't know. I don't even know what to say. Like, it could create this situation where it creates a ton of hyper concentrated offenses in good spots in the late portion. So yeah, super interesting. Let's talk. We talked real quick about Las Vegas and Devontae Adams, and he's priced at a point where, yeah, we probably don't expect exorbitant amount of ownership to flow his direction. We also have Jacoby Myers, who you mentioned, is priced down at only 5.5 in salary on DK. What is your interest level in a guy like that? And do you think he's going to generate some ownership? Do you think he's going to be sneaky at all?
I do think he'll probably be. I think both of those guys, because of the quarterback situation right now, it's hard to look at projected ownership even with that situation. But
yeah,
I think with where both are priced, and I think where a lot of the meta wants to skate to on this slate, that they will probably be under-owned. Especially when you think wide receiver at the top, we're going to get inherently, a lot of pull to Diggs because of what we talked about. Obviously, Tyreek and Jefferson are always going to orbit their own rostership, and then Jamar Chase is facing the Titans.
Yes.
So we've got a lot pulling away from Devontae Adams where he's priced, and Keenan Allen is going to be an absolute, because Keenan Allen, FanDuel said screw it, we're going to he's the same price basically as Jefferson and Tyreek. They were like, screw it, because now going back to last year, this isn't just a couple game sample at Keenan Allen. His last 9 games, he's been a top 12 scoring wide receiver in 6 of them, and he's led all wide receivers in scoring 3 of those 9 weeks, which is a super high rate when you think of the wide receiver position, to just outright lead the position in scoring. But DraftKings has kind of been slower to make him a full elite wide receiver. He's still, don't get me wrong, he's still highly priced. You have to pay to get Keenan Allen, but he's probably still at least probably 600 to 800 cheaper than probably what he's actually performing at compared to some of those other guys. So he's going to be really popular. So you get inherent late swap leverage off of him, especially if you're chasing points, right? Because he's going to just be more popular. And then Jacoby Myers is priced in kind of that just nebulous zone where either people want to, you don't see a lot of guys played in the mid 5s really, right? Almost ever. So people either just want to go down, they're going to go down to take Dell, they're going to go down to Josh Palmer.
Yep.
Will they even play Quentin Johnston in this game? I do want to bring up Marvin Mims at some point, your guy.
Oh,
He's
we're gonna
also
talk.
priced
We're
down
gonna
there
talk.
too.
Yeah.
But so I do think that the Vegas guys will probably, I believe, be under owned, because I still think there's a performance level, especially on a full PPR site like DraftKings. There is value, I think, for those guys to be, if you're chasing points later on, to get to those guys.
If you're playing now, I pose this question to you, and we'll get to some of the other juicy stuff as well here in a minute. But if you're playing Devontae Adams and or Jacoby Myers, do you think this is a situation where a 4.9 Brian Hoyer is at all feasible? Is that something that you would jump on this week?
Probably not, but I also don't want to get too down the rabbit hole because, last week I came on and talked about, maybe Dawson Knox missing, and then he was active an hour after we got off the air, and I was like,
yeah.
So I don't want to go down this whole another 5 to 6 minute tangent of this variable that might not even exist. But I mean, but if you're saying you have Herbert lineups though, and you're chasing, you might have to do that, right? You might have to go that route, or to get to Purdy. You might have to get to Purdy or something else later, because Herbert's going to be so popular if you're chasing points. I don't think you're going to be able to make up the ground through Charger stacks in the afternoon.
Yeah, that's valid. And when I'm looking at the overall composition of the slate, to kind of just real quickly tangentially talk about this, as far as paying down for a quarterback, we have to kind of realize what that is saying. What do we need to happen if you're paying that far down? We've talked a little bit about this in the past, but if you're paying for one of these really cheap, sub 5,500 quarterbacks, you're basically saying that they can put up a 5x type multiplier and get you 25 fantasy points. But you're also saying that these high priced quarterbacks on the slate cannot put, or do not put, the slate out of reach. Because if they put the slate out of reach and they put up a 40 burger, that is a score that you had to have, or you're not winning anything. So can that happen on this slate? Well, we have Josh Allen at 8,200. We have Jalen Hurts at 8,000 against Washington that they should absolutely shred. We have Herbert that you talked about down at 7,800. Lamar Jackson 7,700 in what is now the most difficult matchup in the NFL against Cleveland. And then Tua, Cousins, Richardson. But you notice a lot of, we'll throw in Fields there as well.
I mean, I don't think Burrow's drawn dead in this spot. Obviously, the Titans are never going to sneak through anybody.
Yeah, so we'll go all the way down to Burrow. That's a good shout. That's a list of what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 quarterbacks that would need to, again, we use this term loosely, but fail to put the slate out of reach in order for a guy like Brian Hoyer or any number of these pay down type quarterbacks to be in the optimal discussion. And yes, there's a lot that goes into that discussion. We don't need optimal to win these contests, all that. But I think it's important to view that discussion in the terms of optimal, because it is highly in the theoretical realm, as in, how do we make sure that we're positioning ourselves to maximize expected value? We need to be thinking about things in these terms. And I think it's easiest to do at the quarterback position, because we can visualize what paying down for one of these lower priced guys means a little bit easier. And there's more variables when you're talking about wide receivers or even tight ends. So that's an interesting discussion to be had this week. Me being the sicko that I am, I might build a roster with a Hoyer double stack. Let's go. I mean, to be again, I need you to get 25 points. And if your 70 to 80% of your production through the air is expected to go through 2 players, that becomes an interesting discussion, as in, if Devontae Adams puts up 12 catches for 100 plus yards and 2 touchdowns, and Jacoby Myers breaks 100 yards and scores a touchdown, which is kind of what you would need from that player pairing in a GPP. What does that mean for Brian Hoyer? Well, he's probably approaching.
Garoppolo's only 5'3", looking at it too, to be honest. If Garoppolo plays, I think that he fits that. But Garoppolo's come close. He's had 2 really good games for fantasy. I know real life football different. He didn't play great on Sunday, but he had points on Sunday night.
And that's exactly what we're talking about. And last game,
you look at
he put up
again.
23.6.
I think he's drawing live for the bonus for sure on DraftKings.
And that is kind of what we're talking about. And also there's that discussion of like, I'm kind of viewing this situation as Jimmy G does not play because we have had exactly 0 players get concussed and then play the next week. So far this season, it probably has a lot to do with Tua and what happened last year and all the new protocol rules. So I'm kind of approaching this spot as Tua does not play, or not Tua, Jimmy G does not play. So yeah, I don't know. That's a lot of talk about a guy named Brian Hoyer that probably didn't need to happen, but that's kind of how to conceptualize the quarterback position in particular and how to kind of build that leverage smartly, I think. So it was important to have.
Yeah. To answer Chris's question in the chat, I don't think that Keenan is going to go overlooked on DraftKings at all, but on FanDuel he will because of where the structurally how he's priced, and people want to inherently always play Keenan Allen on a full PPR site versus FanDuel anyways. But looking at projected ownership, obviously it's Friday, but like he's going to be really popular still on DraftKings.
Yeah, and all of that.
And honestly, though, we should say that though in the context of we're probably still going to see flat ownership overall at this stage of the season. Like we're not pushing 30% on any of these guys.
Yeah.
So also it's not the levels where you have to ignore the chalk either.
Yep. And while we expect Keenan Allen to have some ownership, he probably is not going to be as highly owned as Joshua Palmer, who's priced at 4K. That's an interesting discussion. Let's talk about that real quick. Let's move to that, which is also a part of the late part of this slate, and the Chargers. If we're putting ourselves in Kellen Moore's shoes and we are thinking about how do we, and we can make these statements because Kellen Moore has a history of being adaptable in his offense and putting an offense together based to maximize the talent that he has on the field. We have now a rookie wide receiver in Quentin Johnston who has not been utilized. And we have to, at some point, be honest with ourselves and say, do we think that he's not being utilized because Kellen Moore is an idiot? Or do we think he's not being utilized because Kellen Moore is really, really smart and he sees something that he's missing so far in Quentin Johnston?
I think it's just the bridge of Quentin Johnston, right? Like he played an air raid offense in college.
Yeah.
He didn't do a lot of traditional, wide receiver, like what NFL wide receivers asked to do. He was more of a yak guy, which is, a lot of people thought he was like a, down the field target. But yeah, I think it's more acclimation to what an NFL offense is going to ask from a wide receiver, and they're bringing him along in that capacity, which, again, that's going to signal that Joshua Palmer is going to be on the field a lot more in week 4 than Quentin Johnston. Now, when we have this conversation in week 14, it could be different.
Yeah.
But for week 4, the slate we're approaching now, I would anticipate Josh Palmer to be on the field for 90% plus of the team dropbacks in this game. The wild card is Austin Eckler's involvement, because removing Austin Eckler from this offense, we talked about it with Big Mike 2 weeks in a row, that like the targets have to go somewhere else. You have a running back in Joshua Kelly that's not going to command targets. So those targets inherently get funneled to another player, and Big Mike was the next talented player. Joshua Palmer has not been the type of talent to command targets on his own, but if you remove a 15% target share from Austin Eckler, and he's by default the second proxy best target on the offense, that's a huge boost to him. If Eckler plays, coming under on Josh Palmer would be like a real savvy move, because Eckler is going to command his own targets, but we have to wait and see if Eckler's even going to be available. It's just still, everything's really up in the air and it's nebulous in that situation. But Eckler's actual availability in this game impacts a lot.
Yes, 100%. And if the Chargers were sitting at 3-0, or if the Chargers were sitting at 2-1, even, the team would probably be a little bit more incentivized to rest Eckler with the team on bye in week 5. But the fact that this team is 1-2 and their only win was a narrow win last week in Minnesota, there's a little bit more like, they might be pushing Eckler to play here. We don't even have all the information of like what Eckler's injury was. Like, yeah, it's ankle. It says ankle. Probably was a high ankle sprain, and that timeline for recovery is typically 4 to 6 weeks, which would put him for week 6 after their bye. So there's a lot of interesting aspects with that. We don't know what their decision-making process is going to be with Eckler, but If Eckler misses, and all that discussion around Joshua Palmer is not a guy that's going to command a lion's share of the targets in this offense. Yeah, he's 4K. But and in that same discussion of Quentin Johnston and who he is and what he's probably going to be asked to do in this offense, what do they have? Well, they have two tight ends in Gerald Everett and Donald Parham, excuse me, who saw 50% or more of the offensive snaps a week ago. Does this offense shift? And assuming Austin Eckler is out, assuming Quentin Johnston is not going to be asked to play an 80% snap share, does this offense shift, knowing who Kellen Moore is, to a higher utilization of 12 personnel? Is that something that could happen? And does that boost the between the 20s role of a guy like Donald Parham, who has been utilized heavily in his career in the red zone, but has not seen much work between the 20s? What's your take on the tight end situation here?
Yeah, and the Chargers have that kind of luxury too to use more 12 personnel in that same concept of the 11.5 personnel rule that we always talk about, right? With Gerald Everett, because you can flex him out a little bit more than a traditional tight end, and then you have that, like, you still have like a lot of 11 personnel concepts, but you're running it out of 12 personnel. So I do think that we're going to see a lot of that incorporated, at least in this week. Like I said, this Chargers defense, like without the loss of Big Mike, is going to probably be different 10 weeks from now than week now. But how do they calibrate for this immediate loss in week 4? And I do believe that it will be through those tight ends, especially if there's no Austin Eckler, right? Because you can also use, like they did last week, they used Joshua Kelly basically as a pass protector. I would put air quotes around pass protection, what he was doing, but he was in there. He was out there trying his damnedest to block for Justin Herbert, but he's not running routes, basically, is what I'm saying. And that means the tight ends are going to be running routes and not in pass protection. So I do think that's a great path. And I also think too, when you look at the concept, the slate in general from the tight end position stance, like maybe they don't run more 12 personnel. Maybe they do, but like there's TJ Hawkinson, who's expensive and you know what you're getting. And there's kind of a chasm of what we're doing at tight end the rest of the way out. You know, Travis Kelce's not on the main slate. We brought up the Browns matchup. They're kind of begging you to play Mark Andrews a little bit. They're like, here we keep dropping him. Are you going to play him? But are people going to be comfortable making that click? I think people will get more comfortable playing Kittle if Debo is ruled out, or we get kind of an inclination that he won't play by the time Sunday comes around. But then after that, you see like where everyone's gravitating to, and it's guys like Pat Freiermuth down at the bottom. You know, it's these guys that also have inherently low floors. So at $2,800, you're getting a guy in Donald Parham. Like, even if you get a 0, what he frees up for the rest of your roster still probably is usable based on what other tight ends are doing across the fantasy football landscape, and what, especially ones that will be rostered on other DraftKings rosters. And then you also know, like, he is kind of like he has a goal line role. You know, he literally has 4 end zone targets already this year. He leads the team in red zone targets. So like, there's a path there where he's basically a goal line back at tight end, and could also get more in between the 20 work. And also, if he just sucks, a lot of the field's probably going to suck too.
Yeah. Yeah, this is true. Yeah, you brought up an interesting point. It's like, Donald Parham has seen 4 end zone targets of his 7 total targets this season. So he's obviously a guy that is utilized heavily in the red zone. I brought this up earlier. I want to talk about it real quick with this particular spot. And that is, the Raiders do not have somebody opposite Max Crosby who can win because of this whole Jones saga that is going on. And we won't speak to that here. But the fact that Jones is not here to bring that guy who can get to the quarterback opposite Max Crosby has led to this extremely low pressure rate to this point in the season. They are second to last in pressure rate at just 14.2%. And they are blitzing at 27%. So that's not what you want to see out of an effective defense, is a blitz rate that is higher than their pressure rate. I mean, look at like all the majorly good defenses over the past 5 years, the Jets, the 49ers, you're going to see their pressure rate is greater than their blitz rate. And what does that mean? That means that they're getting to the quarterback without having to dedicate additional players to do so. The Raiders are still trying to generate pressure by blitzing, but that's not effective. What does that mean? Who are they blitzing with? They're blitzing with linebackers, they're blitzing with edge players, and they're blitzing with safeties. So what does that do behind that? If they're not getting pressure and they're dedicating one of those guys to a blitz, the middle of the field is less congested, and it opens up areas for guys like Keenan Allen, guys like a pass catching running back, maybe Austin Eckler, maybe not going to be Joshua Kelly, a guy like Donald Parham, if he sees increased utilization in this offense. So that's a very interesting discussion to be had. And I think that a guy like Parham does a couple of things for us. He opens up a ton of salary, and he gets us exposure to an offense that we expect to succeed in ways that the field is likely not going to get to. So super interesting for me, Donald Parham this week. Let's continue the discussion about the late games, and we'll move over to the San Francisco 49ers. I gave the Cliff Notes version of that discussion as far as Debo's health. Brandon Ayuk is also on the injury report, but we expect him to play. Played through the same shoulder issue last week. What's your read on this situation? And I want to pay particular attention, I think, in this discussion about the Arizona Cardinals. With that, I'm not going to give you any more leads, but that'll be your lead in for this game.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen now the 49ers in this target tree, because we know there's a finite amount of targets available, in this offensive system, and that's not conducive to the amount of talent here. Like, there typically is a guy that usually gets frozen out of this offense. It's more or less always been George Kittle from a volume perspective when both Debo and Ayuk have been on the field. But when one of these guys misses, like, there's just like huge boosts for like everyone else. We saw it again last week on Thursday, right? Ayuk is out, Debo and Kittle end up smashing. When it gets down to two guys, it works. When it's all three, someone gets cannibalized. It's usually Kittle. So if we don't get Debo by then, it gives a huge boost to both those guys. Also, the Cardinals are back on the flow chart again for like tight ends. They've allowed a tight end one score every week again this season. I mean, it's the Gannon style of defense too. It's not the old Steve Wilkes style, but like Gannon is playing extremely passive defense. They aren't blitzing the quarterback. They aren't playing like hardly any man coverage. They're not creating any pressure. That's like music to Brock Purdy's ears, right? Like that's like where he lives. When Purdy hasn't been pressured, only Tua has a higher, quarterback rating than Brock Purdy is. He's having 9.7 yards per pass attempt when he's not pressured. Absolutely like bonkers. Again, that tree, that coaching tree of having faith in. And I don't think they're going to bring a lot of pressure on Purdy in this game either. I think the other interesting component of this game is Christian McCaffrey, right? Like we saw 2 weeks ago, people still want to pay for wide receivers more. Like Christian McCaffrey against the Rams, he was on the main slate last week, but like he still just didn't have the ownership that like a player of his caliber, especially at running back where there's a big gap to the field and where Christian McCaffrey's operating right now, should be. And like, I don't know if that's going to continue, if that's something that continues to go overlooked, but he's such a bankable commodity for what you pay for. And you know what you're getting for, even if he doesn't score touchdowns, which he has a touchdown in 12 straight games played. But you're getting these 20 touch games, you're getting usage in the receiving game, you're getting touchdown equity. And it feels like because the meta is to pay for one of these wide receivers, like he's going overlooked on these slates.
Yes. I'm going to bring something up on the screen. Well, first we'll look at Brock Purdy, because he is one of the most consistent to put up like 2+ touchdowns, but at a price. And in that same discussion as a guy like Brian Hoyer, like what do we need from a guy like Brock Purdy in this spot? Well, we need him to put up 25+ fantasy points, and we need those other quarterbacks to fail. But because this offense just continues to hum along and score 30+ points every week, we basically need, and he's highly unlikely, Purdy, to eclipse and hit the bonus on DraftKings and hit 300 yards. So we're going to need 3 touchdowns. And where are those touchdowns going to come? Can this team score 3 touchdowns? Yes. What if he's throwing 3 to 1 to each of Kittle and Ayuk and CMC, and CMC's getting his touchdown through the air, which based on historical performance in this offense, we know is possible. Now, does Brock Purdy become interesting? My answer is yeah. So let's remove this. Is this an okay allocation of salary on this slate? Just saying, like, we have a high confidence rate that the 49ers are going to score 30 points. what if those touchdowns are flowing in this fashion? Can this pay off, something like this? And do you need a quote unquote bring back in this situation?
I don't know if you need to force the bring back. Obviously, with the 49ers makes it tricky. I mean, listen, Drew Petzing's done an amazing job, especially the past 2 weeks. What he did last week against the Cowboys, I mean, in the run game, right? Like the run scheme that they're deploying, is it like they're like James Conner's ripping runs. It wasn't just the Rondell Moore run or the Josh Dobbs long run, but like James Conner the past 2 weeks is not getting touched, until he's 5 yards downfield. Now, is that going to that has not been the 49ers MO, right? Like, being able to line up and just run the football on the 49ers. So we're going to get a great litmus test of Drew Petzing in this matchup. So I'm really excited to kind of see how that plays out. I'm probably not going to play any James Conner because of the respect I have for the 49ers defense, but it is an avenue to kind of explore if you are going to like do run backs, or if you want to look at Rondell Moore, a guy who's now getting that weird usage, right? Like he's almost like a half running back, half wide receiver now. Just when he had the 6 targets, he had the 3 rushing attempts. Like that's at least usage that like at his salary that is fine to take a shot on.
Yeah, in my mind, I don't think you need to force any Arizona involvement if you're attacking this 49ers, and you led with that. I'm in concurrence agreement with that. But it's interesting. 1, this game is a late game. 2, we don't expect people to be overly excited about completely diving into like a game overstack or a team overstack with the 49ers. If Debo is out, yeah, we're going to see Kittle garner some ownership. We're going to see Ayuk garner some ownership, but nobody's going to be overly excited about like throwing Brock Purdy into 2 of those guys or completely overstacking this spot, which I think is interesting. And
no one ever wants to play Purdy for some reason. He's so consistent, so reliable. Yeah,
exactly. This is a guy like he failed to put up 2 passing scores once this year, and like the world was like, no, this can't happen. This guy is just scoring 2 touchdowns every single week. But yeah, I don't know. Is there upside there for a full overstack? I don't know if my mind is made up yet, but it's an interesting discussion to be had, I think, and particularly because this game is on the late part of the slate, and we don't expect exorbitant amounts of ownership to kind of flow here. All right, so we talked about, we don't have to talk on the other late game. There is one interesting perspective to look at the Dallas side of this game, in the sense that we know the Patriots are likely going to play a lot of man coverage.
Right.
What does CeeDee Lamb do against man coverage? He absolutely dominates it. Not going to have a lot of ownership. He's priced at a range below the elites at 7,500 here. Where is he? Yeah, 7,500. And is interesting because in any matchup where he's being schemed utilization, particularly against man coverage, where his targets per route run is off the charts, there is the potential for a guy like CD to put up 102 and become optimal. And that is probably going to go overlooked on the slate. Let's talk about
in my column too, especially for late swapping purposes, right? If you're coming in chasing points, Keenan is going to be highly rostered. We probably will see Devontae be a little under rostered, but he's going to come in well below both of those players. And like you said, already 3.43 yards per out run against man coverage to open this season. If you remember a couple of years ago, and I know you're going back a couple of years, when these 2 teams played, like Lamb absolutely eviscerated the Patriots.
Yeah.
Like it just absolutely killed them. But if the Patriots are going to be aggressive, and we did see them be aggressive against another man beater in AJ Brown in week 1, they didn't care. Like they played a bunch of man coverage that game. He had like a 50-yarder called back that he juggled out of bounds. It wasn't an incomplete pass, so it's not to say like he lost it, but there was a chance for AJ Brown to have like 130, 140 in that game.
100%. And CD, like we said, CD is a guy that can do that in this spot.
He's also a guy that can catch like 10 or 12 passes too. It's not like he's like reliant on like big plays. He's a guy that can have like the 10 to 12 catch game.
100%. We're already in minute 50, man. So I think we gotta talk about 2 spots.
We suck at this.
No, or we're really freaking good at it. Let's go with that. Let's go with that. We can do this for hours, guys. Let's talk about this game. I think this is a game. This could be a game where you have to get right this week because when you talk about either strength on strength matchups or weakness on weakness, sorry, this one's a weakness on weakness matchup. What it does from like the outcome, the range of outcomes of the game is it provides this massively wide range of outcomes. You could see just both teams be extremely shitty in this instance where it's a weakness on weakness. We know both offenses have not looked good. We know both defenses are bottom 2 in the league right now. Or you could see the offenses just continue to struggle. In this particular game, there's a lot of interesting behind the scenes moving pieces. We have a guy like Luke Getsy and his offense who is it looks like they're trying to force Justin Fields to be this pocket passer plus that also has mobility. That same kind of career
it's the Mike Vick
trajectory
situation all over again, man. Remember
Yes.
Greg Knapp, Mike Vick?
Yes. And it's like the same thing. It's like Josh Allen did it. Okay. Jalen Hurts did it. So now we're going to make Justin Fields do it. We're going to make him develop to be this pocket passer that also has mobility. Over the second half of the 2022 season, we saw Getsy just basically design an offense to maximize what he had. He didn't have a lot, but what he had was a highly mobile and extremely elite with the ball in his hands, Justin Fields in the open field. Does this offense at some point, and again, they're building something special, guys. He said so himself. Does this offense shift back to a, yo, dude, just go out and ball? Like, I know we watched the tape and even Fields said so like this week. He's like, yes, I watch the tape. I do my study, but when I hit the field, I just want to go ball. It's like, does this team ever go back to just balling? I don't know. On the other side, we have beat reporters saying on air about the Denver Broncos that he can't say what the changes were because they're not allowed to talk about what they see in practice. But he said, expect personnel changes. We got to talk about it. Is this the Marvin Mims week, guys? Is it?
We got to sneak it through.
So
especially when Josh Palmer's at 4K. We got to sneak it through.
Yes, we could. And I think it is. I think it is, guys. I think this is what we've all been waiting for. What are you seeing from this game environment? And that was a lot of conjecture, speculation. Can this game be a game that you kind of had to have pieces for or of?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously we take the Bears offense to get there from a game environment stance, but on the Broncos side, like I'm confident in the Broncos offense. They've been fine. The Broncos offense has been fine. Like that's why I thought with some of the changes too might be deployed, might be on the defensive side versus offensive that we haven't been hit on. That's why I hope not. Listen, Marvin Mims leads the team in receiving yardage and he's run 27 routes on the season. The most insane stat of the early season. But like Russ has been fine. Like even Russ in a down outing last week, that would have been his 5th highest scoring game last year. Like, I think he's fine. And when you look at the Bears in general, they've allowed 25 or more points now going back to last year in 13 straight games. We've seen Baker Mayfield get there. We've seen Jordan Love get there. Ironically, Patrick Mahomes threw for the fewest yards per pass attempt against the Bears out of 3 quarterbacks that they faced. So I am confident in the Denver side. I think Denver is going to get points in this game. From a game environment stance, we need the Bears to draw some life here, to draw any type of pulse. This is the ultimate stoppable force versus movable object. Because the Broncos defense is in the same boat. Like, yeah, you got shredded by the Dolphins, but they allowed 35 points to the Commanders 2 weeks ago. They allowed the most yards per drive in week 1 to the Raiders. Like, if there ever was a time for the Bears to just even give us something, man, give us find a way to 24, right? Like just find a way to 24. Like
this is the pregame speech. It's like, give me something, man.
Just find a way. And they're getting killed on like downfield throws. That's the thing too. It's like, does Fields have this ability? Because it's not just the Tua stuff. On throws 10 yards or further downfield in week 1, Jimmy Garoppolo was 8 of 9 on those throws. Sam Howell was 6 of 10 on those throws in week 2. These are not guys with like, that typically occupy in like that level of passing. So it's like, man, like if there ever was a time, Bears offense, give us some life. But I do think the Broncos side, I think you can confidently play Broncos pieces in this game.
100% agree. I want to bring up something on the screen that is super interesting and I think is going extremely overlooked. This is our dude Cole Kmet this season. After his breakout year,
week. He got
you got too. But look at these numbers, guys. Look at this. This is somebody who is going to hit at some point once the Bears figure it out. And if this is the week that the Bears figure it out, this is a guy who has a 95.5% route participation rate. He is a guy who has seen 2 red zone looks already. And we have to take that into context of this is not a team that's in the red zone a whole heck of a lot. And this is a guy who has yak ability. He's got 59 yards after the catch, which ranks 7th in the league on only 11 receptions. So when you talk about where are the paths to upside from this game? And in my mind, it runs through Chicago from the sense of the Broncos have a top 10 offensive line. They're probably going to be comfortable playing this. This could be the first game of the season where they are able to control the game environment with their offensive line, with being able to maintain sustained drives and put together time of possession. This could be their first chance to do so. But if they are pushed, knowing who their coaching staff is with Joe Lombardi and Sean Payton, that's where the upside, I think, comes. And this is a very interesting, now let me change again the screen. This is a very interesting way to get upside from this spot in a way that the field is not going to do.
Beautiful. Look at it. It's like the fountain gift.
It's so beautiful. If Fields and Cole Kmet are hitting, what does Cole Kmet need in order to be in the optimal discussion? He did it one time last year. He was second to optimal one week as well. He needs to score 2 touchdowns. If Fields is optimal and Cole Kmet is scoring 2 touchdowns, he has all kinds of outs to being optimal if he's throwing for 2 touchdowns. So this is very interesting. It unlocks some potential for Marvin Mims upside, considering all the things that we talked about already. Fields is probably going to go under-owned on this spot. And Cole Kmet is kind of forgotten about because everybody likes the bright and shiny new toy in DJ Moore. Well, it's like Cole Kmet is on the field. He's running routes, and he's still that same yak potential guy. And when you're talking about yak potential against this form of the Denver Broncos, there's a ton of upside here with this spot. And it feels so gross, but it feels so good at the same time.
I tried last week. I mixed Kmet into because it's tight end, we're trying to make things happen at tight end. And I see the same thing as you do, the opportunity. And it's like, it's going to happen. Like, can I be there early? And I'll tell you what, last week was not early still.
From experience, last week, wasn't it? Oh, man. I think real quick, I don't think we can end this without talking about the Cincinnati Bengals. So I'll throw it over to you. Give me a quick elevator pitch on the Bengals this week.
I mean, they're gonna throw the ball 50 times. That's really like that's my huge elevator pitch. Is they're gonna have at least 40 pass attempts, probably pushing 50. Against this Titans defense. So that's really it. That's like all you need to know. You brought up a great point though too earlier. So like the history though of Jamar Chase and T. Higgins simultaneously doing it together is very thin.
Mm-hmm.
Especially usually when Chase goes off, like Higgins typically does next to nothing. So it is hard to run doubles, like just from that top down stance. But I guess if there was ever a time, it would be this. But I mean, I obviously Chase is going to draw ownership. He always does. But like, the Burrow side, I think, is probably the most interesting.
Yes. And it's most interesting because for the first time under Zach Taylor, this offense did things in week 3 to try and exploit 2 high looks. They brought Chase into the slot. He had 6 targets from the slot, which is by far a career high. He ran a career high snap rate from the slot. And why is that important? Because this team does not have that downfield safety manipulator to be able to hold a safety to the side of the field. That would be Jamar Chase, but they're not going to utilize him as this, hey, go run deep and we're going to pass it underneath type thing. But they also have other tools that they've been very slow to react to manipulate safeties against too high. And why is that important? We can expect Tennessee to be running too high a lot. And if Jamar Chase is going to be this queen chess piece that moved around the formation and schemed usage and still running deep routes, but now doing it out of the slot and being in motion pre-snap, those are things that when paired with a quarterback's eyes, his body positioning, his hips, can influence an opposing safety. And finally, we have seen it. It is happening. Look at, compare it to 2 years ago when Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow were both like, yeah, dude, this too high stuff, we're trying to figure it out. Eric Bieniemy and Andy Reid instituted this gadget role in their offense. It was McCole Hardman. Then when he got hurt, it was Jerick McKinnon. This year, it was Kadarius Toney. When he didn't play last week, it was Jerick McKinnon again. That is their answer, plus Marquez Valdes-Scantling running deep to attack and have success against too high. The Bengals had not had that until last week. It's the first time I saw it, and that's exciting. And play Jamar Chase. That's all I got.
Yeah. I mean, the payback on that, the one I've given Zach Taylor a lot of grief over his tenure with the Bengals, but the one thing they've constantly done since they drafted Jamar Chase is acquiesce the offense to Jamar Chase. And you saw it as a rookie when he was winning over the top and teams started to take that away. They found a way to get him more targets underneath. We saw last year when he became like a full field wide receiver. And then we saw the slow start this year. What can we do to make Jamar Chase work? And they've consistently worked around that. So I do give Zach Taylor credit for that, because us as fantasy gamers appreciate when coaches try to get the best players the football.
Yes, thank you. And do more of that safety manipulator stuff with Jamar. That was great. Do more of that. As always, Rich, it has been a damn pleasure. You can find us every week on Friday at 12 Eastern, searching for Ceiling. You know where to find Rich, but if you are new here, go check out Rich's work. His is almost exclusively housed over at Sharp Football Analysis. Check out 1 week season. And until next week, we'll see you at the top of the leaderboards, fam.
1 week season.